Welcome to our final session of our study. This has been 6 weeks. You are the remaining people who stuck with this thing thus far, so I'm impressed that you're here. We may have some other folks who trickle in here shortly. Just so you know how the study is influencing people and rubbing off on people here, Paul and Pat Caban shared with me a book they'd like me to explore, the Encyclopedia of Sacred Sexuality, from aphrodisiacs and ecstasy to yoni worship and Zaplam yoga. So this is going to be my weekly reading this week, and be careful. You never know what I was going to say. You never know what these conversations might bring up along the way. So today is kind of the last step or last leg of this part of our journey together, and I really want it to be more informal than anything else. I'm going to have a few introductory remarks, and then we're going to talk more about this session. We've had lots of conversation within the life of this church, especially as we've entered this visioning process about what it would mean to be an open and affirming church. Many of you have asked, what does that mean? What does that title mean? And so today I want to bring some education to that, to get us all on the same page about what that means, and really kind of show you also ways in which we're already living that out without even explicitly stating that thus far. So that's going to be kind of the path today, and I really want to leave room for some conversation at the end, and a culmination of the study. So, when we talk about today's session really is about, okay, so we've been through all of this theologically, biblically. We've talked a lot about particular biblical texts. We've talked about a theology of sexuality, how we get at that. Today really is more practical for me. It's about, okay, we've had this conversation. Now, what has this really to do with the church and our ministry anymore? And I think for me, for so many people, issues of sexuality have lots of different lots of different reasons for which people are passionate about them. For some, it's political. We hear that in the political conversation all the time. For some, the focus is on kind of the biological, the issue of science, and what we're learning about sexuality through science anymore. Some, it's a social. But for me, it begins as a theological issue, grounded in a belief that God loves all people without condition, right? And particularly, the God we know through Jesus, God that always advocates for those who are marginalized and those who are disenfranchised, and always cares for those that culture tends to push out. And we see this over and over again throughout the gospel. Tell me some stories that you find where Jesus spends time with someone or cares for someone that society was marginalized at the time. Some of these come to mind for you? The woman at the well. I have that up there. That's kind of one of the most. Jesus comes to this well. She's a Samaritan, so right there, shouldn't be interacting with her. Has conversation with her, tells her, yeah, I know who you are. You've been married 5 times. And now you're living with a man who's not married. But does he condemn her to eternal punishment for that? Does he rake her over the coals for the way that she lives her life? No. He loves her just the same. Yeah, Dottie?
The other one I thought about was the guy for 3 years he had soaked in the pool of water.
Yep.
And Jesus comes to him and says, do you want to be made well?
Yep.
Suppose, as it might appear, people might have just thought he was a crazy person.
Yep. He spent time with the unclean, people who were sick, had terminal or chronic illnesses. Spent time with those who would, in that time, were called demon-possessed or mentally unstable. Who else? Tax collectors. Sinners. Zacchaeus, yes, a perfect example. Exactly. This is the ministry Jesus did. He spent time with those who the rest of the world sort of put on the margins. And he loved them because the first commandment is love God and love your neighbor as yourself. And if Jesus for us is the fulfillment of the law, if Jesus for us is the culmination of our faith, then we are called to live likewise, right? The other reason this issue is important to the church today, obviously it is because it's the most divisive conversation the church has been having in the modern era. At one time, leading up to the Civil War, it would have been slavery. During the civil rights, it would have been race. During women's rights, it would have been women's role in the church. Issues around sexuality are the conversation the church has been most divided about today. We just saw this with the United Methodist Church only a couple of months ago at their general conference, and the decision they made to kind of double down on their stance. The gay and lesbian folks were not to be ordained, were not to have full privilege in the church, were not to be married, to not have full privilege in the church, not serve in leadership capacities to some degree, and to not be able to have same-sex marriage in the church, okay? So, just as current as a couple of months ago, okay? We're talking about this continues to be an issue for the church. But more than anything else, when you look up statistics around the LGBTQ community, you see staggering statistics about how this marginalization has affected this community and these folks. When you look at youth homelessness in this country, a large percentage, almost half of the youth who are homeless in this country are because of some issue around sexuality and having to leave their home, be kicked out of their home because they were not welcome there because of coming out or otherwise. Since 2005, hate crimes against the LGBTQ community have escalated and continue to increase over time. The healthcare issue was somewhat resolved with the decision to legalize same-sex marriage in this country, but of course that was constantly, employment and issues around discrimination in the employment workplace, all that. We hear about it every day in terms of young people being bullied as a result of coming out. So these are all some of the ways in which this community has been kind of pushed to the side, and the church has been a part of this. For lots of different reasons, the community ends up being marginalized in the name of religion, in the name of God, because this scripture verse says this, or our church says that. And so the church has been at the center of this. And so this has been an ongoing issue for the church, and continues to be today. So, when we talk about what it means to be open and affirming, or a congregation to take on that title, we're talking about a couple of different things, and I appreciate Leslie Lady helped me with some of these slides this week. This is actually the definition of what it would mean to be open and affirming. Open being that we make a commitment to communicating our welcome publicly, and affirming gets at a commitment to preaching and teaching the gospel, which understands that God does not reject or condemn people solely for their gender expression or sexual orientation, nor any of the other attributes listed in statements about open and affirming. And so, if you look on the back of our bulletin, which we're going to see that statement in a moment, it has lots of different ways in which we aim at being inclusive to marginalized, right? It's not just about orientation or gender. It's about religious background. It's about ability. It's about race. It's about socioeconomic status, okay? So this is a big tent sort of approach here, okay? But certainly expressing those two, gender and orientation, are very important, right? Because they are those who often feel most excluded from the church in our world today. So, if you go on the Disciples of Christ GLAD Alliance Q website, which is our branch of our church that kind of educates congregations on what it means to be open and affirming, that advocates in lots of different ways, there are 4 marks that they basically list as those things that a church has to sort of do in order to be able to claim that status of being open and affirming. Yeah, Jim. Good question. I don't know if it's copyrighted or not.
Is there a standard for that?
Yes, in our denomination, yes, there is in order to be put on their list of open and affirming churches and have our name as a part of that list, you have to do these marks. Okay? So, and you'll see there's a lot of flexibility here too, so just be patient with me here. So So mark number 1 is that the ministry has come to consensus either through a formal process of study and reflection, informally in the course of its life together, or in its founding documents that it's committed to the mission of the Open Ministry Program, okay? Now, to your point, Jim, what's this really, what are the standards and all that? The reason this is important is because people who have been excluded by the church for these reasons look for these words before they even darken the door, right? We had a family recently, a woman who came to church here, and she's been very regular since then. And she came and after worship was talking to one of our folks and said, actually, can I tell the story? Came up to Jenna and said, hey, Jenna went right over and said, welcome, glad you're here. Introduced her to Betsy, said, why don't you meet my wife Betsy? And this woman said, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you did that. I wasn't sure if I could bring my girlfriend with me to worship this morning. Her girlfriend is Muslim, not practicing, but comes from that tradition. And Jenna said to her, please bring her back. I got an email, sent a note. She filled out, the one woman I've been in correspondence with a lot, her girlfriend, who's come to recently a couple of times to worship, filled out a Connect card last time she was here. And so I reached out to her and said, hey, just want to know, glad you were here. She sent me a long, lengthy email about how appreciative she was. It was her first time to really come to church. She wasn't sure how it would be, and she said, I'm going to come back because of the welcome I received from all of you. So we're already living this to some degree, okay? But you can see in this, there are lots of different ways of getting at this. And I want to show, you can see the words formal process of study and reflection, informally in the course of its life together, or in its founding documents. And we're going to get here in a second. Informally, you all are already living this, okay? We're talking about a little more formal process, okay, to getting there. And so what we've sort of begun, or kind of talking through and going through, is that when the visioning process was initiated, in fact, the first leadership retreat that we did together, one of the 4 priorities that came out of that leadership retreat was to go ahead and make a confirmation as being an open and affirming church. That's been in the background before I even got here. Leadership was having this conversation. And so at that point I said, this is not a check the box sort of thing. This isn't a tactical, technical thing for the most part. This is about identity, and it's about making sure there's consensus about who we are. And so, in part, the visioning process was initiated to sort of help us gain some identity, not just about this, but to give clarity to mission, vision, and certainly this has been a part of that conversation in all the conversations we've had through the assessment, through the visioning summit, and through visioning and leadership's conversations. This has been a part of how to go about this, okay? And so we did this study not just as a part of this process. I just thought it was timely to go ahead and have this study, given the conversations that were taking place. And so that study, of course, concludes today. If we choose to continue to move in this direction, my sense would be that we might have regardless, we're going to probably have some small group conversations this fall about the visioning plan itself, because on the 29th, you're going to see kind of the beginnings of that plan, and we're going to want to make sure that you have time in small groups to have more intimate conversation about the plan. And of course, this will certainly be a part of that conversation. But in the end, if we were to go through the formal process, to Jim's question a little bit, what this ultimately would mean would be that we would adopt a statement of some kind in our founding documents, in our bylaws and constitution, that basically says, we are an open and affirming congregation, we welcome all, and then lays out basically what the back of our bulletin says in a little bit different way. But this is right now, I'll get to that. So that would be kind of the end result, would be that we adopt a statement in our bylaws. And I'll get to the other change here in a moment. Okay, the second mark, so that's the first mark. So whether formally or informally, having gone through a process and come to consensus about this, okay? Pretty loose there, but we're sort of moving more formally. The ministry, number 2, the ministry is confirmed in its this consensus by its founding documents, a congregational vote or non-congregational ministries, a board action, or the ministry is demonstrated to its commitment to the mission and open and affirming program by its witness and commitment to welcoming persons of all gender expressions and sexual orientations over a significant period of time. So that's what I was talking about as it relates to our founding documents. Now, this is the statement that we already have in our bulletin weekly. You read it every Sunday on the back. And it says, at Sandy Springs Christian Church, we celebrate the worth, dignity, and gifts of every person as a child of God. We welcome all to follow Jesus regardless of religious affiliation, gender, race, age, sexual orientation, ethnic background, economics, family, configuration, or ability. Here you will find God's welcome. We have informally already conveyed this publicly, right? Yeah, Jim? Yes. Yes. I don't think that open and affirming is a broad category. But it does, in our time, given the divisiveness of these particular issues, it's very important to segment out those two, gender and orientation. But it is, I think, bigger for us at Sandy Springs Christian Church because I think this is more than just those two issues, right? This has always been a church that is welcome to all people, regardless of who you are. And so I think here it's important that we state it's for everyone, because that's the way this has been lived out. Art?
What are the limits of being welcome? When we say all are welcome, we don't mean that. There are certain categories of people we don't welcome. And there are certain sexual orientations we don't welcome. What are the limits?
What do you?
Welcome people who don't believe this.
Yeah, good question. Good question. Oh, wait, I've got a microphone. There you go. Thank you.
The only reason I'm here today and stayed here through that time is I was raised, and my belief has always been that all people are equal. And when I came here, we had multiracial here, and I assumed that we did welcome everyone, and it was a welcoming church. And at any time, had I seen anything different in that time, I would have walked away from here and I would have never looked back. And I have to tell you that what you're saying is they're all welcome. My belief is, yes, they are. And if they decide through that they don't have a fit here for whatever reason in their personal walk decision, then that's their walk decision. It is not my making that choice for them. And I don't believe I have the right to do that.
So if people believe in slavery, or they believe that adults should love children, they're still welcome.
Adult loving children isn't a sexual orientation.
That doesn't go even in that category.
Why isn't it?
Why?
There are organizations that say it is.
You need to do a little more homework on
I have done a lot of homework, trust me.
Fran?
I don't think we would restrict those people from coming here. I don't think we would restrict those people from coming here. I don't agree with them, and I would not support those practices. But I don't think welcoming people here means that we agree with everything that you might practice. We've got some folks that have practiced some stuff that I don't agree with, but they're welcome.
Don't talk about me like that.
People who want to bring guns to church. We would welcome people who want to bring guns to church.
I wouldn't mind somebody having one that I didn't see, so somebody
I believe we already have.
Mary?
Well, I would assume that whoever walks in our doors is looking for something, and that the message that they receive from the pulpit and from our behavior and from one-on-one conversations would help them leave that idea that we don't agree with.
Yeah, I don't know the, go ahead.
Well, I remember one time on Christmas Day, there was somebody that we really didn't welcome. We had two street people from Atlanta that stood up when we had a moment of silence.
Yeah.
And they were telling us that we were Sodom and Gomorrah, etc. And we did have an elder that asked them, they didn't ask them to leave, we asked them to be seated so we could continue the service. And they chose to leave a little after that. But that would be unwelcome behavior. We could not welcome some behavior that was like that, but they were welcome to stay if they chose to. And our Jewish son-in-law, whom he left that day, said, well, you're not going to see that at Temple.
Yeah. I don't, real quickly, because I don't want to, I want to keep us on, right now we're talking about the marks that we need to take to get to, if we want to claim an open and affirming status. It's a good question Art brings up, don't know the answer. Here's all I can say at this point. I did have someone come to me, after I preached the affirming not accepting sermon about a year ago, I had someone come up to me and was uncomfortable with the degree to welcome. And I was caught off guard, and I was like, okay. And she said, you know, what if you can't love someone because of what they've done to you? I don't know what it was. I don't know if it was abuse or, you know, something that happened as a child. But I do know that there are times where we have to put boundaries about the degree to which someone can participate in the life of the church. And it may be that we have to, for the safety of people, you know, talk about and cross that bridge with what are, you know, what is the welcome here, and how can this person still be a part of this faith community, but also with boundaries around that. I don't know. It seems to me to be kind of a somewhat cross that bridge when we get to it, but also be prepared for when to the degree we can when those things arise. Gary?
Okay, I'm going to use your words, the bridge to God. Jesus is the bridge to God. On that bridge, there is a lack of anybody stepping on anybody's toes. Okay. So if we cross that line and we're stepping on somebody's toes, then I think that is the key. Somebody believes in slavery, that could be stepping on African Americans' toes, or anybody now. Anybody can be in slavery. So they're possibly stepping on their toes.
Yeah.
And when we cross that bridge, we're not stepping on anybody's toes. We're welcoming everybody, etc.
I mean, so one of the ways this gets lived out right now is we have boundaries around who can officiate weddings in our church. Because I want to make sure that if someone is going to preach during a wedding ceremony in our sanctuary, that what we as a congregation want to be said about marriage is said, and not something that we would not want expressed about marriage is said, right? Does that mean that that person's not allowed to be a part of the ceremony? No, they can be. They can co-officiate with me, and they can help exchange vows and do those things. But in terms of the teaching and the preaching aspect, those things, there are boundaries around some of these things. So it's a good question. I don't want to get us off track with that, but it's a good question and fair. Yes, Fran.
I think we're conflicting the value of a person being a child of God
Sure.
and behavior.
Yes, sure, to some degree, potentially. These are some ways right now, this is a draft statement that John Mills and myself, David McGahey is part of the visioning team, and he's been assigned kind of this piece of the visioning process. And this is kind of a draft that we've sort of worked on that I'm just sharing with you today, but this is the kind of thing that will be adopted in our bylaws should we move in this direction, okay? And this particular, I think we pulled this from, or a part of this from the Disciples' website on Open and Affirming. It says, we welcome persons of all sexual orientation, gender expression, socioeconomic status, family configuration, age, national origin, race, religious or non-religious background, and ability. That's all the language that's on the back of our bulletin right now. We embrace all people at any point in their faith journeys and recognize each person as a gift from God. And we proclaim God's inclusive welcome to the communion table and affirm that full and equal participation in the life and leadership of our church is open to all. We already live this. The only thing that has not taken place that I'm aware of within the life of this church has been a same-sex marriage in the sanctuary. Is anybody aware of one of those? I'm not. That would be the only thing that's not happened, I think, in our church that is a part of being open and affirming. We have folks from the LGBTQ community in leadership. When the search committee was interviewing for this position that I'm in, they did not discriminate based on gender or orientation and interviewed folks from the LGBTQ community. So that's the only piece. Let me get to the last one, then we'll talk, then we'll open it up. The last one, the Mark 4, is that there's a statement in our employee manual, okay, which has already been adopted and is already there. It says, the mark is that the ministry has in place policies concerning hiring and employment that encourage applications from persons of all gender expressions and sexual orientations, that provide equal protections and benefits to persons of all gender expressions and sexual orientations. And this is already in the employee manual. Sandy Springs Christian, treating all staff fairly without discriminating on the basis of race, gender, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, nationality, ethnicity, and marital status, encouraging all to apply for employment and evaluating applicants and staff equally. That's in the employee policy. So those are the 4 marks. And those are the ways I already see us living this out in lots of different ways. So really, ultimately, what it would mean for us is to, at a congregational meeting, adopt a statement like that's printed on the back of the bulletin in our bylaws and constitution, and continue to live out intentionally what we already seem to be living out as a congregation. Art.
If there are boundaries, you've said there are boundaries, and others agree that there are, then all is too big a word.
Y'all agree?
Asking us to manage based on exception versus the rule. If this would benefit 98% of the people that notice the change and read it, and we have to deal with a 1% to 2% exception where the boundaries come into play, you're focusing on the wrong thing.
Then we say we accept 98%, but we don't accept all.
Can I ask a question? I totally get what you're getting at here. You don't want to say we're accepting things that are relationships that are not beneficial to all parties. I don't know how you put that in the statement without making this into a really long legal document. And I know you've put a lot of thought to it. Do you have any suggestions on how because again, I think the intent, because the statement's intent is to get people coming in here, and then it's our jobs to actually live what we believe are the right things, right? I mean, it's through example and, I think in listening to any of Nathan's services or any of the worships, it would be clear that we're not promoting any kind of slavery or incest or any of those things. But I get your point. I just don't know how you could put that in the statement. But did you have any suggestions on how you might do that?
I think you have to talk about mutually beneficial relationships.
Okay.
You have to talk about consenting adults. I think you have to talk about expressing love and care the way Jesus expressed it. Right.
So that means children would be
I've got my hands up, and I'm going to answer myself. Y'all know I have a gay son. And we were in California about 10 years ago and went to one of our former minister's churches, Russ Peterman. And right away, they said that they were an open and affirming church. It was the first time I'd ever been in an open and affirming church. Tears came to my eyes because as a parent, what we want more than anything is for our children to be accepted. It is the most important thing to a parent. And when I knew that this church was accepting of my son, even though he wasn't there, he was 3,000 miles away, it meant everything, everything to me. We are not just talking about LGBTQ people. We are talking about parents like me. It would mean so much to me to know that this church said, your son is a gift of God.
Yeah.
The rest of it is just,
Maybe it's that all children of God are welcome. I don't think in saying that we are saying, Art, that we welcome all behaviors. There are tons of behaviors that we don't affirm, approve, or welcome, but I don't know that we have a checklist of you can be a member here if you accept open and affirming. You cannot be a member here if you don't accept open and affirming. I think we have just one. Do you accept Jesus as your...
And that's one of the things that the site says too, is that doesn't mean just because you make a statement or claim a statement, it doesn't mean that everyone's going to agree with that statement necessarily as a part of your church. We're talking about lots of diversity and lots of people, and I think it's a tough thing to wrestle with, like what it means to welcome all, right? It's a hard thing because when you say all are welcome, like what does that really mean? And I think Art's bringing up a good point. I'm grateful to be part of a church that's talking about the degree to which we're going to welcome all people rather than how we're going to limit, as many people as possible, right? Which is the conversation that so many have to some degree. So I can appreciate that. And I think this is a living into our reality. And we're not going to have all the answers along the way. But is this a step toward trying to wrestle with figuring out who God is calling to be? Absolutely. Doesn't mean that the statement might change at some point, or we might, modify it in order to better fit as we live into this. Absolutely. Yeah, Alan?
One thing, Art, you were saying that, all means all. All does not mean, we're, a piece of. All is all. That's the way it's always been. All is all.
Right.
We can't exclude anybody. Zero.
Right. Dottie?
Yeah, the problem in drafting something like this, we'll think